Okay, well, hello everybody. Welcome back. If you were with us yesterday for part one of the Quick Build Networks for All series, if not, welcome. We hope to provide you, if you just joined us and didn't come yesterday, with some background information about what we're talking about here. And we really yesterday kind of set the framework, laid the groundwork for this topic. We're going to continue with our case study examples today and really hear the perspectives from both San Jose and the city of Minneapolis about what they're working on. So my name's Dan Jeline. I want to welcome you back to this PBIC webinar series. This will be our final episode in this particular series. And I'd want to start off by doing some introductions. So just to recap, yesterday we heard from Aaliyah Anderson from Tool Design and Amar Mohite from Harris County Precinct 1. I've got a recording of that webinar to share with you in just a moment. Today we're going to be hearing from a couple of other cities, San Jose and Minneapolis. So I want to introduce the panelists that are joining us today. Matthew Deardahl is here. He's the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the city of Minneapolis. He's an urban planner with 13 years of experience building healthy and active communities in Minnesota. His primary responsibilities include coordinating pedestrian and bicycle initiatives, leading open streets planning processes, and managing the city's pedestrian bicycle advisory committees. Prior to joining the city, Matthew was the active transportation coordinator for the Minnesota Department of Health and a transportation planner with the Headwaters Regional Development Commission. And we're glad to have Matthew with us here. And we have two panelists here from the city of San Jose. John Brazil manages a team of 6 in the city of San Jose's Walk, Bike, Scoot program, which plans, designs, builds, and implements facilities and programs that encourage active transportation. The program seeks to advance the city's mode shift, vision zero, and climate action goals by creating a better community for walking, biking, and scooting. Progress to date includes completing a 400-mile bikeway network, planning, permitting, and coordinating Lyft's bike share system with 82 stations and 750 dockless e-bikes, and regulating 6 e-scooter operators with over 4,000 devices, and finally installing 4,000 bike parking spaces throughout the city. A lot of great work there happening in San Jose from John and his colleague Peter Bennett, who is a transportation specialist in San Jose, California, with the Department of Transportation's Bicycle and Pedestrian Program. He's currently leading the implementation of more than 30 miles of all ages and abilities bicycling facilities in downtown San Jose. Using quick build techniques, the project takes advantage of scheduled pavement maintenance to upgrade to protected bike lanes and bike boulevards. We're excited to have Peter and John both with us, as well as Matthew, to share their perspectives today. We've got Amar and Aaliyah back with us. Aaliyah is going to spend some time at the outset kind of reviewing some of the concepts we talked about early on yesterday before leading into those case study examples. I want to just mention to you all that you do have the ability to submit questions to us at any time. We are going to hold about 30 minutes at the end for a Q&A session with our panelists. So please do send those questions in as you have them. We're archiving both episodes of this series at pedbikeinfo.org/webinars. So visit that page, find webinars from today, and on those pages, what you'll find is a copy of the webinar slides. I posted those as a handout here to make it easy for you to find them. They're available online. The recordings of the videos will be there. We're going to send a follow-up email today with some certificate information of how you can claim your professional development hours for this webinar. I encourage you to review part 1 if you missed it. There's a lot of good information there from Aaliyah at Tool Design, kind of setting the stage, and then a really great case study example from Amar profiling the Harris County and Houston projects that are going on. So I'll send that link out in just a moment. I don't want to delay anymore before we get into our first presentation, so let me hand the screen to Aaliyah Anderson from Tool Design to get us started. So Aaliyah, the screen is coming to you right now.
All right, everyone, it's great to be with you again. Thank you so much for joining the webinar again today, and thank you to Dan for the introduction. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with everyone again. And as Dan mentioned, I'm going to give a very brief recap and a few highlights from yesterday's presentation in case you missed them, particularly for anyone who missed the session yesterday. But my session or my comments this morning will be pretty quick. So I just wanted to start with terminology and definitions. So as we discussed yesterday, quick build and rapid implementation are terms that we use interchangeably to mean basically a project that uses semi-permanent materials to implement a transportation project for roughly a 1 to 5 year timeline, during which you would collect data about safety and use, and then ideally install a permanent design that responds to what you learned. So it's important to note that this is distinct from a pop-up or demonstration project. Things like tactical urbanism or better block projects, those are considered pop-ups or demonstration projects, and those are typically installed with more temporary materials. This is where we're thinking, chalk paint and straw bales. These are often homemade materials, easily installed and removed. That's not really our focus for today. There are a lot of resources out there about pop-up or demonstration projects. Please follow up with me later, and I'd be happy to point you to some of those. And similarly, although our current situation with the pandemic has led to higher than ever demand for safer and wider spaces to walk and bike, the projects we're discussing and the case studies you're going to hear today, they aren't related to a COVID response in the city, and that's not the focus of today's webinar. Many of the messages that you're going to hear today may be relevant to your COVID open streets planning or similar, but we're not focusing specifically on that. If that is something that you're interested in, please, again, feel free to follow up with me, and I'd love to share some resources specific to that. We talked yesterday about why there is such a growing demand and interest for quick build projects. And I think that there's a lot of reasons for that, but one of the biggest ones is the growth of Vision Zero, the Vision Zero movement around the country. This map from the Vision Zero network shows there's more than 40 cities and counties that have adopted Vision Zero action plans, and many more cities than that have adopted some Vision Zero light type policy or goal. And I think this is a big part of the motivation behind quick build, because as cities and counties look to eliminate severe injuries and fatalities from traffic, they're recognizing that the cost of doing so in an effective way would take much longer than they have time for, given their Vision Zero commitments, and really starting to view these as life-saving infrastructure design solutions that there just simply isn't time to wait. And so if we can do them effectively and safely, but quickly, why wouldn't we? I walked through several examples, and I've swapped in some different examples. For those of you who were here yesterday, I wanted to share as many pictures as possible. So I just wanted to share some examples of what quick build projects often look like. So here's one on the left from Minneapolis. We're going to hear more about projects like this with one of our case studies today. On the right, a freeway overpass in Seattle, Washington. Lots of quick build projects are bike lanes, or what's called a pedestrian lane or adaptive sidewalk, as you see in these pictures. Lots of quick build projects are intersection improvements that shorten crossing distance or slow turning vehicle speeds, like the ones that you're seeing here from Calgary or from Portland, Oregon. And quick build projects are often used in both urban locations, like on the right in Baltimore, Maryland, or in more suburban and rural locations, like this adaptive sidewalk in Kirkland, Washington. So we do see them in all sorts of contexts, and the materials change widely. But as you can see in all of these examples, the materials are fairly quick to install and the types of things that you would improve and upgrade over time. Some of the strengths of quick build that we talked about yesterday, I'm going to recap very quickly. These are drawn from Tool Design Group's work on quick build projects across the country, and also just research that's been done about this subject. So some key takeaways. First of all, they are strategic because they avoid the issue of the perfect being the enemy of the good. And that is mostly focused on design. Oftentimes we spend a lot of time perfecting our 100% design plans because the installation of the project is going to be permanent and very expensive. Whereas if you are comfortable getting a project to 90% design and installing it there and then adapting and improving it over time, because the installation is not as expensive to install or change, it can be a lot more beneficial and get the project done quickly. Everybody has experienced, I'm sure, in their own community, the impact that fear of change has on transportation planning and community development projects. Quick build projects help solve that because they give people something to experience and start using, as opposed to looking at photo renderings and talking about in the abstract for years. So it really can help manage backlash and negative reactions that are mostly tied to just simply the fear of change. Obviously, most transportation projects take a long time to implement. The average can be between 2 to 3 years for a typical bicycle and pedestrian project, but sometimes they take 10, 15, even 20 years. And during that time, the public gets frustrated. Staff change, consultants come and go, and there's a loss of institutional memory that frankly slows projects down even further and builds further distance between the public's desire and the agency's capability to deliver. So that creates frustration that doesn't help anyone. Quick build can really help address that. And then of course, limited funding. The cost to implement quick build projects varies widely depending on the materials that you use, but generally speaking, it has the potential to be less expensive to implement, and therefore you can get a lot done more quickly, and potentially with less funds. So it's called quick build. What specifically is quicker? I've talked about usually they use cheaper materials that are quicker to install. There's an iterative design and planning process, and this is something you're going to hear more about from our case studies in a few minutes, that it's really important to combine the phases that under conventional project implementation are usually linear. For quick build, planning, public engagement, and design all happen in an iterative, compressed process that allows for really short feedback loops that helps facilitate implementation. There's often field engineering where you, like I said, you get a plan to 90% design and then you go out in the field and you figure the last final details out as you install it. In all of the examples that we've looked at, there's typically dedicated staff and or consultant support for these projects. So that's part of what makes it quicker, is that you dedicate somebody's time, either the majority or even full time, to focusing on pushing these projects forward and getting them done. Because they're a political priority, they usually receive expedited review and coordinated agency responses. But it's really important to point out that these projects are not an opportunity to move quickly through the important steps of public engagement, permitting, design review, engineering evaluation, quality control. All of those steps still need to be handled with the same degree of focus and care. They just happen on an expedited timeline as your design is evolving. Again, drawing from our experience and the research on this topic, there's some key considerations that we walked through yesterday, and you're going to hear a lot more about these with the panelists today. You need to have a clear chain of communication for decision making. Do not compromise on your design for safety, accessibility, or equity. I know that many people, as they go to implement quick build projects, will face instances where if we downgraded the design and reduced the potential safety benefits, it might be even faster to implement. You might silence a big naysayer or get somebody else on board with your project. But what we've seen is that that is not worth the compromise, that if it's not a truly safe upgrade for the public, then you aren't going to build support for future projects and follow through on our responsibility as an industry to provide a safe transportation system for the people in our communities. I've already mentioned the importance of community engagement. And the last thing here is maintenance. Something that you'll hear more about today, and we heard yesterday from our speaker, is that you need to consider maintenance from the outset of these projects. You may not have the equipment right now to maintain these projects, or in some cases, quick build projects, the design has been adapted to fit the maintenance equipment that you have. And so you need to think about that in advance so you don't catch yourself by surprise later. One of the important points to keep in mind as we talk today is that the structure for implementing quick build projects varies. Almost every single place that has done this has a slightly different structure for how it gets done. And I thought yesterday, Amar Mohite gave a fantastic example or case study of how tailored and customized the model needs to be. When he shared that in Houston, the county actually took over ownership of the streets temporarily. The county funded the infrastructure and the construction. The city designed and planned the infrastructure. The county is maintaining it for a year and then handing that responsibility back to the city. And the city handled the public engagement process. All of this was managed through a consultant project manager from one firm and a consultant design team from another firm. And so that's just an example of a creative strategy that was put in place to get this done. If you missed yesterday's presentation, I definitely recommend going back and listening to some of Amar's other suggestions. Some of the things that have come up again and again on these projects is the importance of maintaining champions, emphasizing the network, bundling projects together. One intersection or a quarter mile of bike lane is not going to inspire the public to the same degree that a network of connected projects will, and that's going to be important for you. Prioritize safety. Focus on showing results quickly. You want something on the ground within a short timeline of starting to talk about this publicly so that people can quickly experience the results. As I mentioned, focus on building one collaborative team of designers and operators who are working together from the start of the project. And remember that the initial projects are only the beginning. You want to refine your designs, your materials, and your process constantly as you go. Again, Amar really stressed this yesterday when he said you have to allow the project to evolve and adapt along the way. He gave the example of engaging the waste collection team in the city in Bikeway design after the first implementation, realizing that they needed to get trash collected, and how are they going to do that better with the subsequent implementations. The last thing I want to say is how important it is to think ahead about measuring performance and sharing your stories. So please set up a system for tracking your progress after implementation at the outset of your project. There's a great example of how that was done from the city of Calgary. You can reach out to them, reach out to me, or listen to the webinar yesterday for a little bit more information. So thank you. That's the overview I wanted to share. I'm really excited to dive into the examples today from San Jose and Minneapolis. And I hope you'll reach out if there's anything I can do as a follow-up.
Thanks so much, Aaliyah, for that recap and some of those concepts that we'll be illustrating further with these case study examples today. I'm going to send the screen over to Matthew. Matthew Deardahl right now from the city of Minneapolis. Matthew, I see your screen and you're all squared away. It's set to go.
All right, thanks, Dan, and thanks, Aaliyah, for the intro. I am, again, Matthew Deardahl, Bike Ped Coordinator in Minneapolis. I'm really excited to talk with you today about our quick build history in Minneapolis. And in preparation for this webinar, it sort of hit me that we have maybe more of a robust program for quick build than I had thought before I started preparing for this. So I'm excited to share that story and how it kind of ties into all of the other work that we're doing, from protected bikeways to pedestrian crossing improvements to our Vision Zero action plan work. And then just briefly at the end, how this preparation for quick build has helped us at least partially respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. The other way to frame the story of quick build in Minneapolis, I would say dates back to when I started for the city in 2015. At the time, there was a significant amount of community requests every year, probably thousands, through our 3-on-1 and others. And our pedestrian and bicycle advocates and advisors were really, I guess, advocating for quick build in Minneapolis. And we didn't have a great way to respond quickly to a lot of these requests, because often requests that we get don't align with our capital program. And so it's just very challenging to figure out how to do it. And so we started with Quick Build as a way to respond to some of these community requests. We did a lot of experiments. We developed an evaluation program, and that's currently, we're continuing to evolve our evaluation program, which is really important. And over the years, we've started to shift to more of a data-driven program that's connected to our larger policy goals. And I think that's really important to think about as you go as well. So again, I'd frame that as started out largely reactive, found some success in Quick Build, and transitioned to largely proactive. There will always be a component of responding to community requests though. I want to start by briefly touching on the federal non-motorized transportation pilot program that Minneapolis received. Just very briefly, this program speed up our Quick Build in Minneapolis. I would say biggest thing that it did in Minneapolis helped us find and how Bikeways in Minneapolis. That's the biggest impact made. It was a $25 million grant that received it. We were able to address 35 miles of new or improved bikeways over that 4-year period. And then we did a robust evaluation of it. And I would just point you to the website at the bottom there if you want to see it. So there's 16 innovative bike-related treatments. I'll cover some of them, a quick look. And so, sorry, welcome back. I had just gotten done, or was just in the middle of talking about the federal non-motorized transportation pilot program. I'm going to move on to the vision of our protected bikeways in Minneapolis and frame it around Quick Build as well, because that was our implementation approach. So in 2015, the city passed a protected bikeway plan that called for up to 48 miles of new protected bike lanes by 2020. The goal was 30, but we had 48 miles in the plan. And so we definitely hit that 30-mile mark and are moving on to others now. So the pictures sort of shows some early installations, reducing a 4-lane street to 2-lane for traffic and wide buffers with the bollards there. And then the picture you see in the middle and the bottom, we added a 2-way protected bike lane near the University of Minnesota, and with the bollards as well. Another Quick Build thing that we tried, which was really interesting, is we wanted to experiment early on with a little bit more robust barrier. And so what this is like an industrial curb stop that was sort of manually put in place along one of our blocks for protected bikeways. And we found that to be very successful for our protected bikeway program. And there's another picture of it on the bottom right. Since then, we have transitioned to a different type of concrete barrier. So still about 6 inches high, 2 feet wide, but we bought a machine that just pumps it out, kind of like those Play-Doh machines where you just push it down from the top and it produces this really smooth concrete barrier. So that's a really positive part of our Quick Build program in terms of providing a little bit more robust barrier. So I'm just going to show a few different pictures and go a little faster than planned through here. Just some different types of installations. This is a 1-way street that used to be two lanes for traffic. We reduced that down to 1. Like a lot of cities around the country, we've overbuilt a fair amount of our streets for motor vehicle capacity, and so we have a lot of opportunity to either reduce lane widths or the number of lanes. This is that same corridor a little bit farther down. We also install improved pedestrian crossings as well, which we'll get to in a second. This is a MnDOT bridge, so the state DOT that we worked with to get permission to reduce the travel lane widths across the Mississippi River into downtown, and again added the the bollards. And this was such a big part of our early quick build philosophy, was to narrow travel lane width, so the number of lanes, add a buffer with the flex posts or bollards or hit sticks, whatever you want to call them. This is another example of installing a two-way. On this particular installation, we removed parking from both sides, which can sometimes be political or controversial, but this is such a critical link to the University of Minnesota. So we were able to do that on a fairly low volume residential street. Moving on, we're experimenting with planters as a buffer type along our protected bikeways. And you can just see an example of that here. And then this is what I was talking about earlier, a concrete barrier, again, 2 feet wide, 6 inches high. We like this because it actually prevents cars from getting into the bikeway space. We know that people feel more comfortable with more robust physical separation. So this is something that we're doing a lot retroactively, going back to some of our early installations of bollard protected bikeways and adding more robust protection. Here's an example of a connection that we made where we didn't have the traditional grid, street grid, and so this is just a little connection that we paved as part of a bikeway. And then finally, the permanent installation. So quick build is really important. We can get a lot more miles by doing quick build. It's a lot cheaper, but this is ultimately our goal. And part of the reason quick build is so helpful is because we can only reconstruct so many streets a year. But when we get the opportunity, we like to add, raised or protected bikeway. And that's just one example. So I wanted to move on to quick builds for pedestrians. This is sort of the second phase after we kind of got our protected bikeway program rolling. And so what I mean here is just trying to find ways to make it easier, safer, more comfortable for pedestrians to cross the street. And so that typically means bump outs, center median or pedestrian safety island, and then intersection simplification. We have a variety of neighborhoods in the city that have weird streets that zig and zag, and it just leaves a little extra space for people to cross. And so one of the things that we've been doing is going back and using quick build to tee them up, kind of get rid of some of that dead space. And I'll show some examples of that. The history of the pedestrian crossing started again with advocacy. So this picture, or these pictures, are from a 2015 Open Streets in Minneapolis. So the city has a fairly robust Open Streets program. We do about 8 a year on our busy corridors. And we were starting to think about quick build at that time. And so this was just an opportunity to sort of show people what it could look like, extending the curb or curb bump outs. And we were also at the time considering revisions to our crosswalk marking policy from the transverse parallel lines to a zebra or continental. And we've also experimented with using rail. And so what you're looking at now is a 2017 installation, essentially using a solid rail that's drilled into the pavement. This is called design line as the quick build. And we did a fairly extensive evaluation of this as well. The biggest thing that I was worried about as a winter city is how well snowplows would handle this. And there were really no issues with it. They were able to use the rail kind of like they do a curb. And so the plow blade could essentially rub against it, and it didn't damage it or the plow. And then here's just another example where we had identified this intersection as a crossing challenge for years, and we had it in our capital program, but we wanted to get to it early, and so we used these bollards in the center of the street for a temporary median refuge island, and then we built it like this. And this street's up for reconstruction as well, so sometimes there's a phased approach, and I would recommend considering that as well. And then finally, some of these quick build treatments have been popular. They've been successful. And when we passed our Vision Zero action plan this past December, one of the biggest strategies was essentially a quick build. And so in the first 3 years of our implementation of Vision Zero, we want to get to as many of our high injury streets as we can. And in 2020, this year, we have an initiative we're calling 20 and 20, where we're going to install 20 quick build pedestrian and street safety projects. Again, targeting bump outs, center medians, and also experimenting for the first time bollard hardened center lines. So that'll be really interesting to see how that works. And then again, I'll quickly go through here just in the interest of time, but we sort of taken some of the lessons of quick build and applied it fairly rapidly in response to open up some more space for people walking and biking for social distancing. And you can just see in the right the context for our city and where these healthy, stay healthy street loops are. And then our park board has also done a lot of work around their parkway system around the lakes and the Mississippi River. I'll just show just a couple pictures of that. And then I'll just end with our lessons and suggestions. And I know there's probably a wide variety of cities, agencies, interests on this call. And so lessons for communities that haven't worked much with quick build, I would say try it out, call it a pilot, temporary, test, whatever you want to call it. I think this helps put people's mind at ease. A permanence can sometimes make people a little more, I guess, nervous about it. Be prepared for issues and have that be part of it. So assure people that you'll evaluate, you'll monitor, you'll adjust, and actually follow through on that. So if a neighborhood business has some issues with a quick build, you may want to work with them to change it. And then interestingly, being prepared for success is also a suggestion. And we've dealt with that a decent amount when early on we planned to take out our installation after a couple months, but the evaluation showed that it was really successful. And then there was just a lot of pressure to keep it in and make it permanent. And that can be a year or two process. And so just be prepared for that or think through how you'd respond. Find low-hanging fruit. Parking spaces near intersections is a great place to start for pedestrian crossing improvements, because you can just put the bollards in. People shouldn't be parking very close to the intersection anyway. And then also if you have wider streets where you can just narrow up some travel lanes and install bike lanes with a little bit of a buffer and put in some bollards, I think that can be that can build up some support and show evidence that it works. And then maintenance, that's really important. Keep it simple. Maintenance doesn't have to be elaborate, but you have to make a commitment to it. And sometimes maintenance concerns can be the big thing that prevents this from going in. So find a way to get your maintenance staff on board, talk to them early and often. And frankly, like, it can be okay sometimes if there's a little bit of a buildup of debris inside a bump out or something. So try not to let that get in your way, but think about it and plan for it early often. And then lessons for communities that have experimented with quick build, I would say always consider a plan to expand it, especially if it goes really well. Tie it to your bigger policy goals, so safety, climate, priority for pedestrian and bicycles, and whatever else, economic development, whatever the big priorities are that sell in your community. And then finally, I'll land on consider options to convert these relatively temporary semi-permanent installations to permanent infrastructure when there's an opportunity. And again, especially if you can demonstrate success and that people really like it, incorporating them into street reconstructions where feasible makes a lot of sense. And then finally, I'll just give a shout out to our state DOT. They have a demonstration pilot project implementation guide, and I think this will be shared. You can see the link there. It's also easily searchable via Google. So I think, yes, I think I'm going to end there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Matthew. Awesome. I love the images. A lot of great projects clearly in Minneapolis. And thanks for getting us back on track there and working through those technical issues as well. I'm going to hand the screen to our next panelist, John Brazil in San Jose. John, I'll let you know when I see your screen and when I hear you, and we'll go from there.
Great. Can you hear me now?
I can. Yes, you're all set.
Wonderful. Well, thanks, everyone. Matthew, that was really great, fascinating to see your work. I was really inspired by it. Also, thanks to Amar and Aaliyah for their great presentations. So my name is John Brazil, and as Dan mentioned in the introduction, I manage San Jose's Walk, Bike, Scoot program. There are 7 of us in this program, and we're tasked with building projects and programs to get more people walking, biking, and scooting. I'm joined by my cohort, Peter Bennett. We're here to share our experiences implementing a quick build downtown bike network. So while this project focused on bikes, the effort did include pedestrian and transit improvements as well. I think Peter may touch on that in his part of the presentation. Okay, so here's what we're going to share with you. First, I'll start out with a snapshot of the city to give you context. And then to set the stage, I'll provide a bit of history on our previous efforts, and I'll note a few aha moments. I think they'll seem kind of obvious to you now, but back then they were somewhat of ahas. And then I'll hand it off to Peter, and he'll talk about our Downtown Better Bikeways quick build network. So here's a snapshot visually of the city of San Jose. What's San Jose like? I think it's important to just have a little bit of context to know what we were working with and are working with. So with a population of just over 1 million spread over 180 square miles, San Jose has a population density of about 5,500 people per square mile. So what does that translate to? It's, I'd say, really a suburban, sprawly city with an urbanizing core. You can see that in this image here. The mid-rise buildings are kind of our urban core that's becoming more mixed use, dense, and transit oriented, but we are surrounded downtown by freeways, which can be a barrier to biking. We also have flat terrain and moderate weather with more than 300 days of sunshine a year. Our population is racially diverse with about a third Latinx, a third Asian American, and a third white. We have relatively high levels of income and education. We have a fairly supportive city high-level policies. We have a general plan with some really aggressive mode shift goals to cut auto trips roughly in half, from 80% down to 40%. We also have a climate action plan that's compliant with the Paris Accord, and we have a Vision Zero plan. I think we were the 4th or 5th Vision Zero plan to be approved in North America. And finally, we have a placemaking plan that's hard to describe, but I think it's really inspiring because it says, don't just build stuff, but create great communities where people want to live, work, and play. So we've completed, by the end of this year at least, we will have completed a 400-mile bikeway network that's identified in our 11-year-old bike plan. We have an 83-station bike share system with an additional, as was mentioned earlier, 750 dockless e-bikes. We have 5 shared e-scooter companies permitted for more than 4,000 devices. That number keeps changing. And so you'd think, with all this going for us on paper, that sounds really great. You'd think we'd have a really high bike mode share, but we actually don't. So what have we been doing wrong? So let me give you a quick build backstory, and then I'll hand it off to Peter soon. So I first started thinking about this in 2007 when I was visiting in Seville. You may recall in yesterday's session that Aaliyah also talked about Seville. It's an inspiring city. In 2007, Seville had just implemented what we now call a quick build bike network. In 18 months, they built 80 kilometers of all ages and abilities bikeways. And in the next few years, they saw bike mode share jump from 0.5% to 6%. That's pretty amazing. So I remember biking around Seville and realizing the first of my 2 key ahas, which again kind of seem common now, but the first was, hey, we need to build facilities where people feel safe. And that's mainly separated bike lanes and bike boulevards. So when I wrote that city bike plan in 2009, I called those out and made them recommendations, but at that time there really wasn't political or community support for funding these facilities. So we built a 400-mile network as of the end of this year that is mostly not necessarily all ages and abilities. Only in the last couple of years did we start doing separated bikeways and bike boulevards. So the result is our bike mode share has been stagnant at 1%. So now jump forward to 2014 when city leaders were beginning to warm up to separated bike lanes and bike boulevards. But using traditional planning, design, and construction processes created all sorts of problems that you've heard us talk about in this presentation and yesterday. They took too long, they were too expensive, and they didn't allow nimble iterative modifications. Our first separated bike lane took 2 years, cost about $50,000, and was only about 50 feet long. You see it here in this picture. It was a raised curb protected separated bike lane. And by the way, this picture was taken during shelter in place. That's why it looks pretty dead in the picture, but usually it's pretty active. So this is where the second aha comes in. We needed to use quick build strategies. And that's exactly what Peter did with our Downtown Better Bikeways project in 2018 and 2019. Before Peter talks about that project, let me mention how we're scaling up this quick build strategy. I and a consultant team at Tool Design have nearly completed a 2-year process to create our new city bike plan. So that plan includes a 600-mile network that will be all ages and abilities, so mainly separated bike lanes and bike boulevards, and it will also be quick build. So this will cut the implementation costs and schedule nearly in half. That's a huge benefit. So now let me introduce Peter to talk about our Better Bikeways quick build project.
Okay, thanks, John. And as John mentioned, I was working as the project manager of the San Jose Better Bikeways Network, and this project started in about 2017. And I'll be sharing some lessons, some stories from the project, and what my experience has been, and what things we have here on the ground. So on the left side, you can see a map of what our network looks like. It is downtown focused. It also makes some connections across the barriers that John mentioned around our downtown. And that's actually how the first draft network in 2017 came about, is we looked for strategic opportunities to do improved bikeways. We had a series of meetings to develop this map, but network was always the word we were using. And you can see it has 4 or 5 north-south and east-west connections, so it really does function as a network. The darker orange lines are the ones that are built and in the ground today, and those we'll call the 2018 projects. And then the lighter orange lines we're following up on a phase 2 in actually in this year. So you can see the network coming in a couple phases. On the right, there's an image of what it looks like kind of in the core of the downtown. The palette of materials we use are the green plastic bollards, and the tan paint on the ground represents what would be a future permanent build island, or maybe you can imagine that as concrete. So we'll see a lot more pictures of this as I go on. And also you'll see on the picture on the right, there are scooter riders on our network. The scooters actually arrived in that 2018, early 2018 time when we were just doing the planning and outreach for this project. Nothing had shown up on the ground. And many people joined our meetings and said, you know, let's talk about the scooters. Why are they on the sidewalks? And it was very good timing for us to say, well, we actually have some projects planned that could address this. And so the scooter riders helped actually form some support for this project. And as we started to get some ridership data, they also form some of the increase in ridership that we've had. So first, I'll go through what our outreach engagement process was like. We used many different methods. We didn't just hold 2 public meetings and go to construction and dust off our hands. We knew that this was going to be different and this is going to be big. And the concept that we talked about for what we were trying to avoid was called the political valley. And that is the line graph on the bottom right. You can see while your project is being planned and starting construction, not many people know about a project. it may have moderate support, and then as soon as you hit construction, you're going to dip into a valley. We saw that yesterday in the example from Calgary. But your challenge here is to make your way out of the valley as the project is finished construction and seeing a lot of use picking up. But we knew that we're not getting out of that valley just from sitting back and waiting. We needed to hold all kinds of different outreach throughout the process. So the orange bars above that represent that our meetings are going to continue for a year past when construction starts. And the numbers on the right show that instead of just a few meetings, we actually were going to organizations that were already meeting and doing 15 minutes on their agenda. We were doing more mailings, we were going door to door with businesses, and other things like that. So we saw this as kind of a mixed methods approach. Here's a few pictures of those methods. Actually, that in that early planning phase, we did pop up the bike lane on one street for 1 week. And so this is not a quick build project, but showing what you're talking about using the pop-up methods helped us get to phase 2 of that spectrum from quick build to permanent. We also knew we had a lot of stakeholders in the downtown that would make or break this project. And so some of these stakeholders involved some detailed design meetings instead of just the 15 minutes on their agenda. The picture on the right shows that we were in the fire truck with the fire department, seeing how they navigate our streets and how we can design for that. And this was our political valley. We had the paint go down on one of the first streets on a Friday, and everybody parked in both lanes, the old parking and the new parking. And the news outlets were very quick to take some very enticing pictures of this. So we had articles come out. We had to adapt quickly, and we looked into if the bollards could go in soon afterwards, or what we could do. And it actually only lasted about a week in this condition of parking in both locations. But that doesn't mean the political valley lasted a week. We had other things we kept doing. And so here's some examples of things. When we had a concerned local engineer, we would go out and meet with him or have a phone call with him. The bus operators and the trash collection companies, we would adapt when asked for someone who's providing input. We want to talk to them, and whether they're happy or upset, we found that listening always resulted in maybe a design change that everyone could be satisfied with. So now I'll get into the design and construction of this bikeway network. I find that these lessons might be a little bit in the weeds, detailed, but a lot of folks who are in this webinar might not see all the specific details, but will be able to take some of these to their projects. The background is, as I mentioned, this is part of a pavement maintenance project. So something San Jose has been doing for years is when a street is repaved, we always see that as an opportunity to change the layout from one curb to the other curb. So there's going to be a new coat of asphalt on top of the street. What can we do just with paint alone that changes the lane arrangement, adds bike lanes, adds crosswalks, but nothing that is a physical construction? And so that's something that we've been doing for several years. And when the concept of an all ages and abilities bikeway network came up, we said, well, the one tool that we need to add to this into our toolbox is that we'll need some kind of vertical element. So quick build for us was essentially doing the pavement maintenance project with the paint on the ground, but also putting in a few plastic posts. We used the NACDO All Ages and Abilities Design Guide to determine what type of bike facility made the most sense on that grid-like map that I showed you earlier. And it wasn't always a separated protected bike lane. That was the case for places where we had higher traffic volumes or speeds, but in that NACDO guidance, you also sometimes
are guided towards installing a basic bike lane or a bike boulevard type treatment. And sure enough, this was the way, after looking at the conditions on the roadways, this is what we ended up with. The purple lines in the downtown core did need to be protected bike lanes. But as you make your way out of that downtown core, that's where those blue lines are shown. Those are in more residential neighborhood areas. Maybe just a regular buffered or basic bike lane will do. And then further out where you're on slower, low volume streets with houses, we just used a calm street treatment, better known as a bike boulevard. This was the first thing that we started developing with our design consultant were details. These little pictures on the screen, there's about 6 of them, they show elements in a toolkit that we could combine in different combinations to create a cohesive network. Whether you're at one intersection or another intersection, you're always seeing the same markings. And these represent bits of corners and block lengths that you would be installing in combinations with each other. So when you use all these details, you agree on those first with your planning staff, and then it's just a matter of applying them across the streets. And this is what it would look like, all applied in different combinations at different parts of each intersection. So a few other things that we were looking at, we did have in our network one street that had bus service on it. And because construction happened really rapidly, we needed to put in some version of the protected bike lanes before we had the bus platforms installed there where the bus would pull up next to them. And you can see with a parking protected bike lane and a bus pulling into the bike lane, it didn't work very well. The bus hangs out into the travel lane. It doesn't get fully to the curb to a point where the passengers can board, and the bike lane is completely stopped up. So while it was necessary to have a time period where the buses were pulling in and out of these gaps in the bollards, this wasn't something that was a functional design long term. And so this is what we used instead. We've seen some pictures in some other quick build. This is a bus platform that is made of modular pieces from a company called Zikla. And the bike channel goes behind the bus platform, and you can see some of the bus riders are waiting on our railing on the island. And now the bus has pulled out of the travel lane, and it's also not blocking anything else, and it's fully against the platform. So these islands, as I mentioned, they weren't in right away, and they were a design challenge that we had to keep working on as the project was implemented. And we also saw a change to our bus network. So the bus lines that were on the street actually were changed due to a network redesign. So it's somewhat fortunate that we didn't put in all the platforms permanently just to have to take them out again. Here's another example of something we used on our bike boulevard streets. A common feature of a bike boulevard is a traffic diverter, a place where cars are going to turn left or right, but bikes can go straight through. These are usually made of concrete, and in a permanent version of this network, this certainly would be made of concrete. But this image shows how with paint and plastic alone, and it's very busy with paint and plastic, we created a spot where bikes are going straight through and cars are turning. And we heard this in a few other presentations. We also had to work with our trash collection companies and determine how these dumpsters can be safely picked up and moved in and out from the buildings near them. One issue we had was dumpsters that would roll down the street all the way to the curb. So a quick build solution for this was putting in some of the zebra bumps in between the bollards, so now the dumpsters have something to roll against. And lastly, I wanted to share some design lessons about protected intersections. That's something that we we were kind of pioneering as we were doing the design of this project. And the protected intersection design with paint and plastic only is, we've been putting in these corner islands that you can see on the image on the right. It's very visually striking what the difference was between the left and the right. It's the same intersection, and how much space there was for the pedestrian crossing from corner to corner was quite a long distance in the past. And now these protected corners have narrowed down that pedestrian crossing to just the crossing of the two travel lanes. And here's some images of those protected corners on the ground. Because the protected intersection design is such a new concept that a lot of cities are still working through, we wanted to make sure the van turning in the photo is turning and yielding when they're reaching the bike crossing. And the images on the right show that we've used some small reflective bumps in those corners to create a yield situation. And we look to New York City and other cities that have used these actual speed humps in those same corners. That's something that we'd be adding to this network in the future. So a few lessons learned about the construction and planning of this project. This was a department-wide commitment. There were over 100 Department of Transportation employees who at some point touched this project in a big or a small way. It was our maintenance crews all the way up to our planning and engineering staff. And in that 2018 period when the design was happening, we had a cross-departmental planning staff meeting weekly every Wednesday for 2 hours to just talk through the issues and actually design on the fly. So having someone from your parking group there, even though they may not normally be involved in a planning exercise, it was important, and it helped us work through issues on a more of a day-to-day basis rather than getting a response a month later. We also continued that design all the way through into construction. Field verifying the design was a big thing that our engineers were working on, and you can see a picture here of a place where we were building a protected intersection and we needed to know how the bus turned the corner. And everyone had their phones out and we all watched the bus turn the corner, and we moved that orange cone around based on where we saw the bus turning. And so this is an image that shows that actually that same intersection in a more complete fashion. And I wanted to talk a bit about measuring success. We've collected some data, and we also have some before data stashed away for when we can compare apples to apples before and after data. But one quick result we saw is that in many different locations in downtown, we saw a 33% increase in bike and scooter ridership. But on the better Bikeway streets, we saw a 50% increase. So they overperformed the other streets that hadn't gotten some kind of improvement. And I want to finish up with talking about how this project compares to a capital project in terms of cost. As I mentioned, we were building this first phase of the Better Bikeways in 2018 and 2019. That 2-year process, the total cost of it is about 1.3 million, and that's in San Jose, California dollars, so this could always be translated. As comparison, we have a project coming up that is for upgrading 1 mile of our network into a permanent capital project, and that 1 mile will be planned over the next 5 years. And the estimated cost for that project is $11 million. This is not to say that one type of project is better or worse than the other type. These are two necessary kinds of projects, but they have different costs and different timescales. And importantly, that capital project is a direct descendant of the Better Bikeways quick build project. So the quick build was installed our state granting agency who has awarded us that grant thought that it was very compelling that we had successfully demonstrated it, and they awarded us that grant. So quick build projects can essentially write your grant application for you when it comes to getting the funding for the permanent construction. And that is the end of my presentation. Here's one more image of our protected corners, and I'm looking forward to questions.
All right, thanks so much, Peter. I really appreciate that, and I want to get right into the Q&A because we got some really good questions that came in. So you should see now a collection of the contact information for our panelists in case you want to reach out to anyone directly. Just a reminder, we've got Aaliyah and Amar back with us as well. So let me get into this is really sort of on the ground question. A lot of questions about materials. You all talked in some detail about these too. Some of the things you're using. We saw a lot of pictures, so we're familiar maybe with some of the elements you're using for the vertical elements in your separated bike lanes and some of the other treatments. I kind of generally wanted to ask about whether as you began to implement quick build projects, and anyone can take this, as you began to implement these projects, did you find yourselves like learning more about different materials and maybe changing course or developing preferences for some type of materials over others? Saw a lot of flex posts and plastic bollards. We also saw some of the armadillos, and I'm just wondering how your thought processes and your preferences kind of evolved over time.
I could jump in to start, and I know there's questions and thoughts about snow in Minneapolis. So the armadillo or anything low with a low profile, we don't do in Minneapolis. Those just get hammered in the winter, and so the basic white plastic post that's flexible is the one that we typically use in Minnesota, and we drill into the pavement. Now we do lose a lot of them, and it's not all because of winter. Cars run into them as well, and so we have made an annual in the spring an annual effort to replace all of them. So I guess that's a partial answer. I'll see what others have to say.
This is John from San Jose. I think it's important for cities to think about what their priorities are. Examples would be, think about your maintenance budget for infrastructure maintenance. Also think about the sensitivity to your communities, whether the aesthetics are high priority or not. For us, we were looking for materials that were relatively durable. And so, for example, we looked at different types of posts, and some were more durable than others because we knew these would be in the ground for more than just 1 year. Also, we did play with armadillos several years ago, but it's really going to be, you got to think about what your community's priorities are and also try out different things. And this is Peter chiming in. I've noticed that since we've done a quick build network, the images I shared, that technique has made its way to other groups in our department, and they don't always choose the same material. And it's all based on what specific design they're doing. Like Matthew mentioned, we're going to be adding some hardened center lines and some curb bulb outs in other places in the city, and they've chosen a different material than our green bollard downtown, simply because there's different context for what they're using. I could imagine, as we have many different groups delivering quick build projects, the palette of options, including things like the concrete curbs that we saw in Minneapolis, they're all going to be in the toolkit. And I hope to see that our DOT will actually come up with what that toolkit is, and then it's just a matter of choosing the materials from that.
Great. Well, thanks so much for that. Another question, kind of getting at how these projects really work, within your department. There's quite a few questions about whether your quick build projects do you have a separate group within your engineering or your design teams that handle quick build versus capital? And then another question, kind of getting at whether the implementation of these projects is handled in-house or whether you're using contractors to do that. So I'll ask, I guess either city to jump in on that.
This is Peter. I'll start. The implementation was cross-departmental for better bikeways, and now we are seeing multiple groups, as I mentioned, going with it. So this is not housed in a specific quick build group. And as far as contractors and in-house, this was also a bit of a hybrid. We did have a consultant working with us, but those Wednesday meetings where we continued working on the design, and then as we were designing on the fly as it was being constructed, a lot of that is also done in-house.
Yeah, in Minneapolis, we don't have a specific quick build group that's separate from capital or otherwise. So we have a planning division and we have a traffic operations division that coordinates on the design of it. And then we have what we call a core team, which is a core team of different specialties in public works, which includes water, surface water and sewer, and our maintenance, to really just make sure everybody's on the same page and understands the different challenges.
Great.
Oh, and we use contractors to install often. Okay,
great. Really, a couple of interesting questions. I was kind of surprised to get these, but I thought they'd be great to ask you all. Do you have any examples of where you've done anything like a roundabout in a quick build fashion? Saw a lot of good protected intersection type applications. We've got a few questions about roundabouts. I just thought I'd ask you all that.
I'll start with that. So we use what we call them traffic circles, so not the full, large scale roundabout, but two fairly low volume streets intersecting. We'll use, bollard protected intersections, so traffic circles, and that's usually tied to our future neighborhood greenway routes or bike boulevard routes.
Okay.
And this is Peter in San Jose. If you check back with us in about 6 months, we should have a paint and plastic post roundabout in the ground. It's something that we're doing this year on some of those more bike boulevard like streets. But in doing the research for that, I found a few other cities that have done something like that, and we're using those as a model.
Great.
Yeah, this is Aaliyah. I wanted to chime in and encourage people to check out Denver's progress in that regard too. Denver has a really awesome program implementing quick build traffic circles on neighborhood bikeways, and there's great information and photos of their efforts online.
Great, excellent. We had a few questions about how we can ensure pedestrian accessibility is prioritized in these projects, and I'll start with Matthew because you did highlight, I think, some really interesting applications for pedestrian projects in the quick build fashion, and just some questions about what you had to think through to ensure that, yeah, we're accommodating all pedestrians, and we're managing to make sure that we're putting the tactile pads where they need to be and all that. Did you have to do anything special to kind of meet those needs, or can you talk any more about that?
So that's an interesting question. I'd say the issue of accessibility for pedestrians has been more geared around our protected bikeway program, and I'll get to that in a second. But in terms of the pedestrian bump outs and medians, we basically add the bollards to the existing street, and typically don't do a lot with the crossing because that sort of already exists. I guess we don't bring out a new sort of pedestrian accessible pad.
Okay.
That's something that we have thought about or talked about. But with the protected bikeways, especially our parking protected bikeways, where we move the parking away from curbside and have the bikeway curbside, accessibility there has been an issue that we've wrestled with. And so in a few cases, we've installed the concrete barrier separating the parked cars from the bikeway, and just did some different treatments to have openings that would lead to a curb ramp. So that's definitely something to think about. And it's a challenge, especially with retrofit projects, to make those things fit.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a great response. Thanks for that. We had a I think we talked a little bit more yesterday about public engagement, but I got some good questions around that aspect of Quick Build today, and I wanted to pose this question to you all. If you've got experience to share on how you've deployed Quick Build networks and these types of projects in what maybe we consider to be traditionally underserved communities, and the comments have been that these projects can be perceived as sort of signals of changing neighborhoods and possible gentrification. And I'm wondering how your cities have been able to thoughtfully engage residents in these types of projects to ensure that they're community driven and really think through those perceptions of what quick build projects and these sort of bike projects may mean. Anyone care to jump on that one?
Hey, this is Aaliyah. I'm happy to, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, sorry.
I'm happy to take the first pass at it. So I think the most important sort of thought or advice I have related to concerns about equity or gentrification and bike lanes is to really take the time to listen to the community and meaningfully engage them on this topic, even if it does mean modifying your schedule. So as a planner or public official, we often all find ourselves in the position of weighing people's complaints. Maybe it's a concern about losing a parking space or construction impacts against what's fundamentally a safety project, a documented safety issue that your design project is intended to serve. And in many of those situations, it's our job to tell people, no, we're not going to, slow down or change this project because of your concern about you losing your parking space or whatever. But concerns about equity and gentrification are different from that, and you need to pause and really engage with communities. What we're seeing more and more is cities and counties that are contracting directly with community groups who represent historically marginalized groups, whether that's people of color, low-income people with disabilities, et cetera, and having those groups engage directly with their trusted communities. There's an amazing example of this in the Oakland, California Bike Plan. I encourage everybody to look that up. It's a great model of how to tackle this issue head on. And I don't know if John or Matthew John or Peter want to talk about this more, but there's a similar model was used for the San Jose Better Bike Plan that is just wrapping up now.
Yeah, this is John. It's a great question, and I don't claim I'm not claiming that San Jose is doing a great job. I think looking backwards, San Jose has done a poor job of kind of in an equitable way engaging underserved communities, and so it's a real learning process. But we did for our bike plan adopt that model that Aaliyah alluded to, hiring local CBOs to really be the folks that reach out to local communities, because the old way, when we show up at a meeting, we're here from the city, this is what we're doing. There's no feeling of, the community doesn't feel engaged or heard. So working through local CBOs that are already immersed in the communities that will be impacted is important. I think also, as much as it's feasible, trying to bring in folks from other parts of your city programs to the meeting to just sit and listen. Because what happens is, we show up, we say, hi, we're here from DOT and we're doing this bike plan. And people kind of figuratively roll their eyes and that's not our priority, bikeways. Our priority is whatever, parking or crime or something else. So to at least bring other folks from other programs in there to the meeting to say, well, while our project is about the street, we're listening to what you have to say and we're relaying those concerns to appropriate departments, and even having to follow up with them if they can is helpful.
I would like to, this is Amar. I would like to echo the last comments. We piggybacked our bike lanes with the Complete Communities program that the city had started, where they were already listening to these communities, and that helped because we did it as a part of that, as based on the concerns we had heard, and or how the city was engaging to see is how this investment within the community could help the community. And going to the other sidewalk questions, the reason we did the sidewalk improvements or the ADA ramp improvements in some areas was so that the community feels that we were listening to them and not just doing the bikeway, but also addressing some of their concerns of accessibility because sometimes the community does not feel that they would be using the bikeways. They would be just it allowed them to see that they were getting something out of it that they wanted. And so it's exactly, I think so, listening to the community and trying to find what would both parties benefit out of this partnership is an important step.
And let me just add one more thing quickly. This is John. So it's what we've learned from Better Bikeways and other projects we're trying to improve in other projects. So in our bike plan, we actually had community meetings, as I said, hosted by local folks that were actually 100% in Spanish, one meeting, and 100% in Vietnamese for another meeting. If you have communities that are diverse based on languages, it's really helpful to do that as well.
Okay, awesome. All good reminders. Thanks. Thanks for all those. I wanted to ask a question about funding. Again, I'm not sure who's the best position to answer this one, so please jump in if you have a response to it. Have you encountered that the quick build projects are more easily supported by certain types of funding sources? Have you been able to find ways to make your funding for these projects work no matter what you're putting on the ground, or did you really have to think through which pots of money can help me support which projects, and how has that impacted the work that you're doing? Sort of a multi-part question there.
So this is John from San Jose. When we were originally planning quick build networks, we did look at a few funding sources and actually had conversations with the funding agencies to determine whether this type of project would be eligible. Fortunately, one of them was, because it was very flexible. But there are most other funding programs, it wasn't really clear because the quick build notion was something new. And we actually had our state DOT in California, it's called Caltrans, and the state commission that oversees it, that manages funding, actually reached out to us and said, hey, we like what you're doing with quick build. Talk to us about how we might make our funding programs eligible for that. And so that was a real big win, and I applaud the state for doing that.
I'll just note that we have a variety of ways that we fund quick build in Minneapolis, and we try to take advantage of every opportunity we can. So there are challenges with our capital program in terms of quick build, because typically there's an expectation that is permanent infrastructure. And so we do fund a lot of our quick build out of our general fund, and have what we call an active mobility fund that can do a lot of the quick build. So just understanding the funding source and what's allowed is something we wrestle with.
Great. No, thanks for that. There's a question here. I think maybe I'll start with the team in San Jose, because you all showed some examples of how you actually used buses to test out some of your applications and make sure they can make those turns and get through. There's a similar question around working with emergency responders, and this question comes up a lot with traffic calming projects. But I'm wondering if you've been able to develop maybe similar relationships and kind of get them to be part of that process to look at these designs on some of your projects. And the person asking is specifically interested in bicycle boulevard applications, and whether with the traffic diverters and such, how did you bring the emergency responders on board with that decision making?
Yeah, thanks for that question. This is Peter in San Jose. And as you saw in my presentation, I had an image from inside the fire truck. So if they let me on the truck, then they must, they must not hate us. So we have a pretty good working relationship with some of our chiefs in the fire department, but that was a result of having them involved in the planning process. And when we first showed them what we were talking about and what was changing about the dimensions of the street, they clearly had concerns, and their concerns mainly fall into two different pots. And it's important to remember the difference between these two. One of them is about on-site operations. So when you're battling a fire and you have stopped your truck and you're unloading all the equipment and getting the hoses out, you want to have enough space for all that activity. But then on the other hand, response times going through the street network is their other concern. And the design that you use for one and the other are different. So for a bike boulevard, for example, if it's just about responding or coming through that area, we're just looking for a minimum clear width for the truck to get through. And for our diverter, we have a way for the truck to make kind of an S shape around it. We also talked to them quite candidly about running over the bollards. And that's something that they have an option of doing that you don't necessarily have if it's a tree. And then for on-site operations, that has to do more with like how much space you leave around a fire hydrant and where the parking lane is in relation to the travel lane that they'll probably be parking the truck in and working in. And that's something that we came to a good solution with them about how much space to leave around the hydrant and where they're going to be walking and things like that.
This is John. I'll add quickly, first of all, that Peter did a fantastic job working with first responders and others. But I want to point out that it's really an iterative process, and you need to be really patient and really listen and continually have a dialogue because I know it was a lot of work for Peter. He did a great job. And in fact, the fire department's thinking evolved in the direction we wanted it to. So don't think it's just going to be a one and done. Continue the dialogue with these parties.
Hey, this is Aaliyah. One quick comment to chime in. I would encourage folks to Google the Montgomery County Fire Department Access Performance-Based Design Guide. That was a mouthful. Also, feel free to follow up with me and I can send you a link to this document. But it's a great document from Montgomery County, Maryland that goes into all of these issues in detail and specifically designed to address situations that recur when trying to implement separated bike lanes and other complete streets treatments related to EMS access.
Right. Well, great. Thank you all so much. I think that's a great place to end it. We could continue to answer questions all afternoon, and I know you all have a lot of questions out there, but I do hope you'll follow up with us offline, maybe by email, either us at PBAC or our panelists. You have their contact information here in the slide package. So I hope you'll be able to do that. I want to extend a big thank you to our panelists for this whole series, Aaliyah Anderson, Amar Muhite, Matthew Deardahl, John Brazil, and Peter Bennett for sharing their perspectives and their examples. And I want to thank all of you for attending this two-part series and really pushing through some of those technical issues today and being patient with us. We got back on track, and I think we're able to deliver some really great information. We are going to send you an email later today with the archive material where you can find the webinar slides, how you can get your certificate of attendance, and all that good information. So please reach out if you have any more questions. I just want to say thank you again, and I hope we'll see you on our next webinar. Thanks, everybody.